Episode 38 is a follow up of episode 37. So I kindly request you to first hop on to episode 37 before proceeding with episode 38. Thank you and enjoy the conversation in this episode. Coming to the question of the actual conflicts that are going on at the moment. So the ongoing conflicts like Russia, Ukraine as well, including Israel, Palestine too, which recently happened. What are your thoughts on these issues from the lens of intelligence?
From the lens of intelligence on the Gaza issue, and what was the other one?
Russia, Ukraine as well.
Russia, Ukraine, yes. So, I mean, there were some certain. Let's start with Ukraine, right? The intelligence community analysts, and you have to take off your hat to them, really got Russia's intent right. I mean, they were almost ahead of it, more so than their foreign minister, right? Who apparently was not in the know about their intent to invade Ukraine.
Yes.
What was, I think, wrong, and it was across the board, not just any particular agency, but multi-countries agency, was how Russia would do. I mean, their capabilities were way overblown. And that's just the proof's
Yes.
in the pudding. You look at right before they invaded, almost all analysts that I know in the government, out of the government, on TV, were predicting days, if not weeks, for Kiev to fall. And now we're, how long away? And now we're critiquing the Ukrainian counteroffensive, right? So that was obviously wrong, and so that was a good and a bad. Another good is that the Special Operations Forces, have been working with the Ukrainians since 2014. It's been
Okay.
widely reported in the media, and I think the initial capability to resist the Russian invasion was really those special operations forces that we worked with so closely. And their capabilities had become much more aligned with the way the West fights, which is more effective in how to fight a modern warfare uh, uh, conflict. And I think that is a big plus that we've seen play benefits all the way till today, but certainly up front with small, specialized units with specialized equipment, in that case, mostly anti-armored, anti-air, man-portable weapon systems that really gave the Russian fits when they thought they would just be rolling into Kiev in a matter of days. So I think that is a success that the U.S. intelligence and special operations community had, is the training of the Ukrainian forces, which then expanded to training conventional forces, but started with those special operations units and intelligence units.
Okay. And we were speaking about this topic as well. Uh, I would like to shed a little bit light on the cyber side as well in the conversation, because we have seen in the Russia-Ukraine side, especially, that there was a cyber outrage that was going on. So can you extend a little bit on the role of cyber warfare in the modern intelligence operations?
Yes, so I think when it first started, it was viewed as a very specialized and in some ways isolated form of espionage, which doesn't just include collecting intelligence, right? It also includes doing covert operations, and not just the paramilitary, but there's all sorts of covert operations. There's influence operations and there's covert cyber operations. But now it is completely integrated into all operations. Like there is essentially very little operations that happen that doesn't have a cyber component because of the modern world we live in. So just about
Okay.
every type of operations we have, there is or should be a cyber component. Now, some of that can be directed covertly to disrupt military logistics, to disrupt communications, especially for command and control, to
Yes.
convince people that something's happening that's not. And it is essential to getting inside their communications network, to either block it or to gather information. Those are all incredibly important things that always existed in some form or fashion in warfare, but now because we're all cyber established, it's become absolutely critical to everything we're doing when
Okay.
it comes to espionage and all-out warfare.
Okay. And uh, this question is mainly from, I would say, strategy perspective, because I believe the kind of world we live in, the threats that we are facing are, more of an hybrid threats. So, how do intelligence agencies and special operations unit adapt to emerging threats and, the changing global dynamics? Because I believe even the hybrid warfare has a lot of geopolitical motives these days.
Yes, I think, this is in military terms, looking at the next ridge line. So, and what they mean by
Yeah.
that is, you know the ridge line you're fighting on, but if you want to be successful for the future fight, you got to start looking at it now. And that's easier said than done. And I know that's a cliche, but that has to be done. You can't just fight, and there's also the other cliche that we're always fighting the last war. Well, we have to look at what the future war is going to be like and prepare for it. And that's going to be, in my opinion, one, it's going to be training together. And yes, we one of the things we do at Lobo is training. But we need to do that whether it's here or anywhere else. We need to train together for how we're going to fight. And we're going to fight as an interagency element, in which takes not only, you know, direct kinetic special operations to account, but also broader cyber operations, diplomatic efforts, influence and propaganda. All of that matters in the actual fight. The campaign plan, if you will, involves all of that, not just one component. And quite frankly, one component isn't more important than the other. So we need to start training in basically working as a task force, if you will, which is we have a task. We need to have all these component presence to be able to be the most effective at it. If we go back to our own silos, we're not doing that. We're not preparing for the next war. That's one component. So it's integration and interagency cooperation. The other component is both getting ahead on technology. That is something the U.S. has always been a part of our national strategy, is what's called offsets. And what it means is we try to get leaps ahead of our adversaries on technology, whether it is, from the
Yes.
nuclear or the first offset. Now, and then there was global positioning satellites, which gave us precision munitions. And the next offset, many people consider, is going to be both an artificial intelligence based combined with robotics, which
Yes.
is very interesting. It could completely change the face of future warfare, but there's also some extremely troubling consequences of that. You can run through the list of sci-fi movies you've seen to know what those are. But
Yes.
those are we have to work as we fight. We have to be the most sophisticated, but the cautionary tale is also be able to fight without the technology, right? If I think I would hope that they're still using maps and compasses at Ranger School and other schools, so that in the event that our GPS system is essentially defeated, then we still know how to navigate. For example, that's just one example. So we have to be the most advanced in technology, but we also have to be capable of functioning without it. And then the last part I would say is we need to start rebuilding, and I think it's happening, our alliances, because the United States fights as a coalition. My old boss, Secretary Mattis, said it multiple times when he was, obviously a Marine. He he fought many wars, and they were all fought with coalitions. So the United
Yes.
States, it's kind of in line with the interagency component, but I would say this on the global scale: we need to have very strong alliances and partnerships with countries around the world that are compatible with us, that we can train in large exercises together, because that is how we're going to fight the war itself. And the more we're capable of doing that, the better when it comes to, uh, the wars that we're fighting, the wars that we may fight. And quite frankly, the old adage, it's both a Roman and think Sun Tzu as well, but uh, in peace, prepare for war, right? And
Yes.
the best way to avoid war is to prepare for it. There's all sorts of quotes to that line because it makes sense, and we need to do it now because that's how
Yes.
you avoid wars in the future is to be so strong that no other entity, country thinks it's in their interest to take you on.
Yes. I believe the intelligence sharing capabilities are very important, especially among allies, because I believe that's how you grow as a, a globally secure power. It's not only about whether your country is developed or not, but I think when you have allies, you have an alliances as well. We are seeing a similar kind of thing, I think, happening in the Indo-Pacific with the grouping of Quad, where United States, India, Australia, and Japan have come
Yeah.
together. They are sharing similar perspectives, but I'm not sure even whether the intelligence sharing will happen or not, because the Quad's complete motive is to counter, the Chinese presence in the Indo-Pacific. And I believe,
Yes.
yeah, I think it's going to need more than just sharing the defense capabilities. It's going to need intelligence sharing capabilities, and I hope the group discussions actually reach that point where these four nations start sharing intelligence within themselves too.
I agree. And that's a really good example of what I'm talking about because it is a group of like minded countries that are partners, allies, that come together, and not just for military. It is important, obviously, that the militaries are compatible and do exercises so they can function together. But
Yes.
diplomatically, economically, it is everything, right? And it's intelligence sharing, which is, of course, important to all the other things. So, intelligence sharing is important for economic issues, for diplomatic issues, and for military issues. So that is part of what I'm talking about, building these strong coalitions, not taking them for granted, working to make sure that they are serviced and that they're functional, because we never know. Look at, I mean, before Russia invaded NATO, there was a lot of people, I think, who were mistakenly saying this, that it was over. There's no need for
Yes.
NATO. The Cold War was over, and that's why it was set up and with a purpose. And now, bam, Russia invades Ukraine, and now NATO expanded, right? With
Yes.
Finland and Sweden, who didn't join
Yes.
during the entirety of the Cold War, but now joined, and now all the countries are, at least some of them are actually doing it. And everyone is talking about increasing their military spending so that they can have a better contribution to the
Yes.
military alliance. So I think that's an example of why we need those alliances and why those alliances need to be serviced and need to be improved and need to be expanded. So
Yes.
it doesn't just rest on the laurels of the past, but looks toward the futures and what we need to be prepared to face together.
Yes. And just to kind of add a little more layer from the public perspective, because we have been speaking about from the internal issues, I would say, of the government affairs and the intelligence agencies. So how do the impact, I mean, from the perspective of popular culture and media on the public perceptions of special operations, how do these things impact the espionage issues or even the special operations?
So how does what it impact the special operations?
The public perception, from the perspective of media and popular culture.
Oh, so like how does the public perception impact intelligence and special operations? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the impact of all these issues on, I would say, the way the media portrays it. So how do these
Well,
things go ahead? Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, as you would expect, a lot of how it's portrayed in the media or in movies, in television, for example,
Yes.
is not really accurate, right? So
Yes. Yes.
it's over dramatic. It's cliffhangers. I mean, that's what people watch, and they've always watched those. Going back to ancient Greece, they wanted
Yes.
drama, right? Um, and
Yes.
so that you could expect that. But I do think sometimes it's portrayed as too um, in a bad light, especially intelligence, in that it's always somebody out there chasing somebody else that done them wrong, and I would say that intelligence is, it is interesting, and it certainly is a lot of the things that's portrayed in the movie. It's just not happening in a 24-hour period, right?
Yes.
But it's a great job. I wouldn't change. If anybody's out there thinking of going, I mean, I wouldn't change anything. That was,
Yes.
I think, one of the most fulfilling jobs I could have ever done, and I would recommend it to anybody that had that kind of mindset and capabilities to go into it. But it isn't what it is portrayed in the sense that, especially the agency, it has oversight committees in the House and the Senate. So in Congress, views of what we do, and if we're doing something that's out of line, it gets noticed and it gets defunded. Quite frankly, that's one thing I'd point out when it comes, especially covert operations, is there is a significant oversight. To The agency doesn't choose to do these things. It's one of the kind of things that's kind of baffled me is the president is signs what's called presidential findings. It tells the agency what to do. It's just like an
Yes.
order to the military. It gives its parameters. It gives what it can't do, is left and right limits, if you will, and then the agency carries it out to the best of its ability. But oftentimes, it's then turned around as if the agency had decided to do this on its own. And perhaps back in the early stages of the agency's existence, that was the case. It's not the case now. The agency carries out operations just like the military does, at a direction of a politically elected leader, in our case, the President of the United States. So it is important that that's known. It's not a rogue elephant as it was used to be called. It's very much
Yes.
not only directed by the commander in chief, but also reviewed by the legislative branch, so the executive and the legislative branch. And I think and obviously, if any of those things are unconstitutional, it would be reviewed, I guess, theoretically, by the Supreme Court and the judicial branch. So I don't know if this is really exactly on point of your question, but I think it's important to
Yes.
point out that
Yes.
oftentimes I hear this all around the world, is the agency's like running its own show. And maybe sometimes that works
Yeah.
well for the agency, for people to believe that. But ultimately, the agency, as capable of it as it is an arm of the national security apparatus of the U.S. government.
Yes.
It answers to the chain of command that ends with an elected president, and it also answers questions and to its own funding from other elected representatives who are assigned to the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. So it is very
Yes.
much not a rogue elephant.
Yes. And I mean, we are reaching at the end of the podcast now. So I believe this question also, relates to somewhat to the public domain. What is the future of intelligence agencies and special operations in an increasingly interconnected and digital world? Primarily because I believe the digital world, especially through the social media platforms, communication evolution in the communication technology, there is a lot of disinformation, that is going on at the moment. So, uh, what are your thoughts on this?
So I have a lot of thoughts on it, but I'll try to make it as short as possible. I think,
Okay.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think that the military special operations and the intelligence community writ large, not just my group, is the ones
Yes.
that need to be continuously out there engaging, and essentially the war doesn't end. And I don't mean like a hot war, but I mean that is their primary responsibility, is to get ahead of what's coming next. The conventional forces need to prepare, they need to equip, they need to do everything and train, but they are essentially there for wars. And when a war starts, they're the primary.
Yes.
It's RB and Marine divisions, and it's the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force that wins wars. Special operations and intelligence does not. We can prepare for it. We can win parts of it, our version of battles, but we don't win the wars. We are supportive when it comes to the wars. But before that, we need to do everything to prepare uh, and try to keep us out of wars, right? That's the other thing we do is if there's something we can do to keep the U.S. out of a conventional war, we need to do it. So, and that goes to my points that I've been driving home. It's continuously working together, not separating because we've decided to end the global war on terror. It is getting advance of the technologies that are coming and integrating it into our operations. And then, of course, it is to keep those relationships overseas. We do it in a big way, as you mentioned, the Quad, but you can also do that
Yes.
in the relationships you have with other special operations forces and intelligence services. That needs to be done as well so that we're prepared and we see it coming, and that if necessary, we can help keep us out of it as a collective intelligence and special operations community. And if that's unsuccessful, which is usually mostly diplomatic efforts, then we're ready to fold in and be the supporting effort to the large scale war that we all hope doesn't happen. That's what I think the
Yes.
role of the future of special operations is: integration, technological superiority, and
Yes.
alliances.
Okay. And I mean, this last question uh, is for students. So I'm zooming out from the conversation of the topic that we have been discussing. Uh, Generally, because there is a lot of student audience, even the researchers, PhD students as well, who listen to this podcast. So generally, I make sure that the final question is for the students, because I believe every expert who comes on my podcast has has some or the other anecdotes to offer to the academicians, especially the student audience who are actually pursuing PhD or pursuing their masters in defense, security, and all. So yeah, so this question is for them. What message would you like to share with the students, researchers, and other stakeholders participating and engaging in defense, security, peace, and conflict research studies?
So, what advice would I have for them going forward on their careers? That the gist of the question?
Yes, yes,
So, one, I think it's incredibly important um, to learn history. You know,
yes,
it is. It is. I mean, I could give you all the cliches, but I'm sure the students all know it. But you have to know where we were to know where we could be going. And in being an expert on any particular element of defense, national security, intelligence, et cetera, is important. But you should all consider yourself at least amateur historians, because it puts it in context of where we need to be going. So that would be the first part. The second part
yes,
is you have to be, um, and this is something that was really enforced in the intelligence community, but as apolitical as possible. And what I mean by that is you have to view everything for what it is when it comes to
yes,
impacting our national security, and not necessarily its impacts on the political system, especially your particular one. There used to
yes,
be a time when politics, they said, stops at the water's edge, and now it just infuses everything. And sometimes it's more about, and I'm a nonpartisan person, as you might be picking up, but sometimes it's more about what's beneficial to the party and not necessarily what's beneficial to the country, regardless of which party is in charge. I think it is incumbent on everybody that's going into the defense, whether it's in the military itself, in the defense industry, in the intelligence industry, to stay away from the politics and to focus on what is best for the country. Because if it doesn't stay consistent, it essentially is not very effective. So if we come up with a strategy that just simply shifts every 4 years, based on the new guy not liking what the old guy did, that's no way to actually have a strategy. It just won't work. So it's
yes,
to the extent that they can enforce that in their self and their colleagues to stay out of that, I would suggest that that is the way they look at their job, is requiring staying out of politics, if they're in the national security field. And the other one is to realize that your job, and this is what I say to everybody, is not just to do what's in front of you and do the best of your abilities, but it's also to be the mentor for the next generation. And if you don't
Yes.
do that, even if you're a great operator, if you did phenomenal things, but you never bothered to mentor the next generation or prepare them, then you missed the boat. You just flat out missed the boat. And I know you're talking a lot of people that
Yes.
might be just starting their careers and they're saying, why are you telling me about being a mentor? Well, I'm telling you now because that's the way you should view it. Whenever you leave a job, you should set the person that takes over up for success. Like you should want them to take whatever you did and improve it, right?
Yes.
It is not about the individual. It is about the team, and ultimately, your job is to make the next generation better than you, better than your
Yes.
generation, including yourself. So I would say those are the things that I would highlight to anybody getting into this field. In addition to the fact that I think you will feel more so than many other people that don't that you have contributed uh, to your society in a way that a lot of others don't get the opportunity to do.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent. I think I hope the students really take away these key aspects from the last question that I mentioned. And yeah, Mick, I think we are reaching the end of the podcast now. So I'd like to thank you very much again, for providing some crucial insights. And I would like to also mention that you are kind of an opening guest for, I would say, the series of the special operations episode, because as I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, there have been no special operations episodes specifically focused on this topic. There have been some episodes on hybrid warfare and, I would say, narrative strategies and espionage, but not dedicated to this special topic. And I think a lot of things came up in our conversation. So I really hope in the future we might record few more episodes with you whenever you have time, of course. So yeah, thank you very much again, and I really hope to have you again on the podcast.
Thank you, Omkar. Great questions, and I look forward to coming back. Just let me know.
Yes.